Thank you all for joining our session, The Crisis Within the Crisis, 2020 Perspective on the Retail Industry. I'm Antoinette King.
I'm Suzanna Alsayed.
And I'm Frances MacTaggart.
So the three of us really wanted to talk about how the retail environment really got hit, not only by COVID as the underlying crisis of 2020, but then throughout the year, additional layers of crises, sometimes secondary and tertiary crises, including weather-related events, hurricanes and floods, tornadoes, and then adding on top of that, murder hornets in some areas, and then the unfortunate situation of civil unrest. So first, what we saw when the pandemic initially hit was this paradigm shift and a division within the retail industry. We had our industries that were deemed, that they were necessities and important, like our grocers, our hardware stores, the Lowe's and the Home Depots of the world, and then our pharmacies. And then we had our luxury retailers, and those retailers were deemed non-essential and ultimately ended up having to shut down. And what this caused was an entire area of retailers that couldn't keep their employees employed and they couldn't keep their revenue flow. And then in this other section that was trying to figure out, how are we going to get more people on the floor? How are we going to keep them safe? How are we going to make sure that we keep product on the shelf? And, basically reinvent the way that people operate within a store, from their suppliers to their end customers. And then we had to add into this whole equation civil unrest and weather-related issues, where we had people's safety and security being threatened, not only from health issues, but then also violence. And then also the retailers that got hit with riots in their towns and their cities, now they had to add on top of this, how are they going to rebuild their stores? And then, so we had to figure out, from a retailer perspective, are we going to shift more of our transactions online? So for those non-essential retailers, they needed to beef up their websites, make sure that they had merchandise available in the warehouses. How are they going to transport that equipment? I know from a personal perspective, I live in a rural area of New York State, and when Amazon Prime used to be 2 days guaranteed, now in some cases, I don't get my products still to this day for another 2 weeks. It's just something that we've had to learn to figure out, learn to live with. And the retailers really had to pivot quickly. Then we want to talk about contact tracing. When people are going into stores, as we started to reopen in the multiple phases, depending on where the store was located, and some of these large retail chains, they had to deal with legislation on a state-by-state basis, which could be really, really difficult when you're talking about scaling. Understanding what the requirements were for contact tracing, how they were going to handle social distancing, and also, making sure that the proper PPE was put into place. It really became a really quick lesson in how to understand business planning and business continuity, how to be able to quickly pivot and be agile. And ultimately, the requirements for the stores to stay in business and for things to run smoothly fell on the shoulders of the employees. They really were the frontline workers in this situation, whether it was dealing with the COVID-19 situation or the additional crises layered on top. It really truly did fall on the shoulders of the employees, and specifically understanding how to de-escalate the responsibilities that were put on the floor workers as well as the guard services. And so I'd like Suzanna to kind of talk to us about how the guard services and guard management was affected by these multiple layers of crises.
So thank you very much, Antoinette. I would actually like to reference to an article that Sarah Miller and I wrote at the end of July called "Why Are Private Security Providers Essential to Grocery Retailers During the COVID-19 Pandemic?" So we wrote the article in order to bring awareness to the changes and challenges that COVID-19 created for retail guard management, as Antoinette mentioned, but specifically to the grocery retailers. So the purpose was to highlight operational challenges and growth that the security industry has experienced during and continuous operations of COVID-19. So the first and obvious point was, of course, access control, since it was greatly impacted due to the need to monitor the number of people allowed in store and that the shoppers are respecting the social distance measure. So other duties included that distribution of masks upon entry. That was before that was mandatory. Denying individuals entry if they decided not to follow the guidelines, queues and crowd management, reporting customer counts, and even in some locations they were doing temperature checks. Enforcement was the second point that we covered in the article. So during the beginning and mid-COVID, regulations were changing on an ongoing basis, and some of the responsibilities was unfortunately as well put on the guards to manage and enforce, and that was enforcing social distancing in line and in store. At times, I don't know if it's the same in the United States, but in Canada, we had the one-way path runways in the aisles in the grocery store. So that needed to be enforced, asking everyone to sanitize their hands and always wear their masks while they are shopping. The third one was violence in the workplace, and I think that's the one that was most unfortunate. There have been countless of stories shared on media of incidents that were deemed uncommon before the pandemic, because now there's like a surge of threats, assaults, damage to property, harassment, and there has always been instances now where workers have been even killed in response to requesting someone to simply wear their PPE while shopping. So that was one of the unfortunate points of COVID. And we also have loss prevention, which is not new, of course, to the retail. However, due to COVID, there was obviously an increase. And that is due to panic buying or worries about food insecurity or fear of poverty, or even delayed payments or support payments, and of course other related reasons that COVID caused. And as a result, skilled staff from private security providers have been contracted to assist with specific requirements and skills. And that would be in investigations or detections or surveillance or other related fields. And the final one, which combines with the loss prevention, is consulting. We do require special skills now, and because we are living in an interesting time, corporations and individuals had to adjust how they could with the resources that they had in hand, and in order to adapt quicker to the shock of COVID, acquiring consulting services from private security became a popular practice. And I believe that these efforts aim to not only respond to the current situation, but to be better equipped in the future. And as we are now seeing, we are in the midst of the second wave. And the consulting services could include updating or creating pandemic procedures or policies, conducting risk assessments, installing additional technologies, create additional trainings, and updating their business continuity plans, which I think is a big one now. And part of the business continuity plan should include supply chain management. And actually, Francis, can you please elaborate on how the supply chain was heavily affected during COVID? I think that's very important to bring up.
Thanks, Suzanna. It is a great important point to bring up, not just during COVID, but also during the before period as well, as I feel like we're all kind of calling before COVID, and not our previous normal circumstances that we took for granted. Disruptions in the supply chain are normal. They are to be expected, as they are to be experienced again and again, even during the second wave, and of course ongoing when we return to a hopefully build back better model. But during COVID-19, we saw an unprecedented situation. Majority of lots of parts of the supply chain were put on hold. They were disrupted, coming from raw materials to suppliers, manufacturing, distribution, retail, which is what we're discussing today, and the consumer is also part of the supply chain itself. So the best way I can illustrate how a supply chain was disrupted during COVID-19 is to use an example. So given the fact that Suzanna and I are hosted within Canada, we have a very large dairy industry here, as many people do around the world. So from a dairy perspective, you have to store this milk that you were able to, of course, harvest and select from afar, and you have to keep it at a certain temperature. If it goes above or below that temperature, that milk is now spoiled and you have to throw it away instantly. And then you have to, again, get it to a manufacturing plant to be able to pasteurize. Then you have to get it to another manufacturing plant to have it sealed, packaged, on for delivery. Then it goes to a distribution plant, which then would go into either travel by land, air, or sea. And then it would get to the retail portion, which would include grocery stores. And then, of course, into the consumer's shopping cart and then home. Now, a lot of things can go awry during that part from any component of the supply chain, regardless if it was, say, a mechanical failure in a truck or a retailer losing power. There's a lot of things that could go wrong, but when you put it into context with a pandemic, where you have trade negotiations, you have clauses and laws that are put in place to ban the exportation of certain goods and services. And then you have to think of the other additional measures too, such as Antoinette said at the beginning of this video, with the need for personal protective equipment, sanitation, and all of those additional measures too. How do those get produced, manufactured, distributed, and getting to your doorstep? So, of course, as I said at the beginning, that disruptions are meant to happen. We learn from them, we grow from them, and we reevaluate and reconfigure, which is the importance of business continuity in any structure of any plan for any business. And the thing with supply chains, for the better part of how you prepare against a disruption, is having multiple sources. Antoinette said at the beginning of the video as well that for people shopping online or having curbside pickup was not part of our everyday norm. But that is a multiple way to get people into your distribution chain. For somebody else who says they need certain equipment from China, such as for masks or hand sanitizers or anything of that variety, getting shipped to, say, Canada or North America or any other part of the world, then you can do manufacturing distribution here and within your own nation. So there are multiple ways of how you can, of course, support against the bandwidth that may be small or may be large. But I think it's important to not lose hope in the fact that there's always going to be a solution if proper planning and the right people are being able to secure the chain.
So thank you so much for tuning in with Antoinette, myself, and Francis. And we hope that you connect with us on LinkedIn. And we would love to hear from you and continue this chat as well.